friends, my name is Brittany from Brittany Loves Reading, and a couple of weeks ago, I did a reaction video to an old book haul, and I noticed a trend while I was filming that all the books I hadn't read, well, not all of them, but a good portion of them, were thrillers. And that made me think, like, at the time I was buying those books, I was reading a lot of thrillers. I was loving thrillers, and I haven't been recently. I do still love a thriller, but I find the more thrillers you read, it's hard to find one that really hits home because there's only so many tropes that can be in thrillers. And also, I just have not been in my thriller era. So I mentioned that in the video. And then the lovely Victoria from What Victoria Reads commented about how I should do a try a chapter with all of these thrillers. So that's what we're going to do in this video. We are going to see if I can bring back my thriller mojo. Can I get back into a thriller era? Can I enjoy thrillers again and want to read thrillers again and want to gravitate toward thrillers again by doing a try a chapter of all the thrillers in that video I had not read? Which is a few. I think there's about 6 or 7. I didn't actually count, so I don't quite remember, but there's definitely quite a few. And I have already started with the first book because I figured I could intro and also tell you about the first chapter of the first book in the same clip. That seems to make sense. I'm going to be filming this over a couple of days, so if you notice that I'm in different clothes and look different as I do this, because there's just no way I can like sit down and read the first chapter of like 7 books all in one sitting and vlog after each one. So we're gonna just kind of like do it over a couple of days. But the first one I started with was The Perfect Wife by J.P. Delaney. This book in that video I thought was an amnesia thriller because that's what the synopsis made it sound like. Abby wakes up from her car accident. She doesn't really remember what's going on. This man is telling her about her life, and she's a bit confused. And that is what happens, but only kind of, because I did not realize something, but this is a genre blend with sci-fi. And if you know, I am currently in my sci-fi era. I am reading a ton of sci-fi and fantasy. And this is a genre blend with sci-fi, so what a perfect start. I read the first 3 chapters of this because that only got me to like 10, 12 pages in. So they're very short chapters, and I felt like one chapter was only like 3 pages. And that was really not enough to give you my vibes on this book. So I did 3. Plus, honestly, did not want to put it down. So we're starting at a really high level with this book. We do follow Abby. Abby wakes up from what she thinks is a coma from a car accident. She remembers the car accident as she's waking up, and her husband is there, and he's like, "Abby, you're awake." And he proceeds to explain to her that she actually died in the car accident. And she is actually not herself. She is something called a cobot. This is something that he has made. He's actually started a business making cobots to basically take the consciousness of a person who has passed away and all their memories and put it into a robot that helps the people who survive with bereavement. Because she has the mind of the original Abby, is actually quite horrified that this has happened to her in the first 3 chapters of the book. Obviously, I can only talk about the first 3 chapters. And right now, she's going home with her husband, Tim, as a cobot. So I had to stop reading it at chapters 3, but like, as you can see, I did put a bookmark in this because I'm definitely going to be continuing with this thriller. I did not want to put this down. I did not want to stop reading it. It was so interesting and so intriguing about this cobot system and being in Abby's head. The audiobook also says there's 3 narrators for this book. So I do expect to have multiple perspectives as we go through. I only was in Abby's for the first 3 chapters, but there are other narrators, so I expect more. We started off with a really, really good one for the first try a chapter for sure. City of the Lost by Kelly Armstrong is the second book I did. I ended up reading the first 2 chapters because that only took me to page 14. In this book, we see Cassie, and she is in her therapist's office. She is explaining to her therapist, for the first time, it's the first time she's seeing this particular therapist, that she actually murdered someone when she was in her early 20s. And we dive into a flashback scene in the second chapter of how that happened. What were the circumstances leading up to that? And we actually see her commit the murder in the second chapter. We find out that it was her college boyfriend, Blaine. Blaine was a drug dealer. He kind of like trespassed on someone else's turf. They came after him and actually ended up injuring Cassie. Cassie thought that he would care that this happened to her. And Blaine actually ran, did not get help, did not help her, did not look after her in the hospital, didn't even contact her while she was in the hospital. And she blamed him. And obviously, she killed him. That's what happened. Cassie is now a detective in the police force, though, so I'm not sure how we went from there to here, but we have. And that all sounds really interesting, but for some reason, these 2 chapters did not capture my attention. Something about them just did not work for me, and I think it was our main character, Cassie. I didn't really connect with her or care about her story enough to really prioritize picking this up. I don't think I'm going to unhaul it because I could see there being a time where I would want a book like this. Also, it's set in Canada, so for a prompt sometime, that might be something that I need, and that might be a good time to try this. And off 2 chapters, I may end up liking the character more as I read through it. But for right now, it just isn't captivating me, and I really do think that it's our main character, Cassie. I just didn't really care about her enough in the first 2 chapters of this book and the way she was written. The stylistic way Cassie came off on the page just didn't really captivate me. Free Fall by Jessica Barry actually follows a plane crash. We start off as Allison wakes up from the plane crash. She is assessing her injuries. She's seeing if anyone else on the plane is still alive. They are not. She starts to gather things that she can use to kind of get her way out of this mountain, to get to civilization, to save herself. That's the first chapter. The second chapter, we follow Maggie, and we follow Maggie as the police come to her door and tell her there's been a plane crash. Her daughter, Allison, is on the plane. They do not know if Allison is alive or dead. They know nothing else. They just know plane crash, Allison on the plane. This one actually really made me think of the plane crash episode from Grey's Anatomy, and I don't really know why, other than that it seems like Allison has some medical knowledge, or at least some first aid knowledge, that she's using while she's gathering up what she's going to use to kind of survive in the wilderness. She seems to have some knowledge, and that just made me think of that. Why? I don't know, but it did. This book has dual narrators for our 2 female perspectives, but there is also listed another narrator at the beginning of the audiobook, so I'm expecting another perspective at some point throughout the book. I really do appreciate when we have multiple perspectives in a thriller to give it a different narrator. It really does lend something to the book and really help me remember whose perspective I'm in, Allison's or Maggie's. This was really, really interesting, and I definitely want to continue. This one's up there. I still think I'm more interested in continuing The Perfect Wife, but this is a very close second, as witnessed by The Bookmark. I think we're starting to get my thriller mojo back. I think this is working because 2 books have bookmarks in them. So obviously I'm going to be reading 2 thrillers soon because I've already started and want to continue. So I think this trio chapter is working, which is really exciting. So I read the first chapter of Second Life by S.J. Watson, and unfortunately, I think this is going to go in my unhaul pile. In this book, we follow our main character, and to be honest, if it told me her name, I have already forgotten it. But she is in an art studio in an art gallery, and she's perusing art for pretty much the entire first chapter. That's all that's happening. And we're in her internal monologue, and nothing about that intrigued me at all. At the very end of the chapter, we follow her going back home to her house, where she does find out that her sister was murdered due to a botched mugging. That's what the police think, at least, that she was being mugged and the mugging went wrong and they ended up killing her. That's the end of the first chapter. And in that time, I realized this was very much a suburban psychological thriller. Over the years and over reading books and learning my reading taste and learning what I enjoy and what I don't enjoy, I've realized that those are typically not my favorites. I do have a few that I do like, but usually because they have a spin off them, like a podcast element or something like that. Just your straight psychological suburban thriller is not typically something that I really gravitate toward. So I think if I were to put this back on my shelves, it would sit there until I did These Books Will Self-Destruct list. It would go on that list. I probably wouldn't read it, and then I would unhaul it. So let's just expedite the process and unhaul it now. That's kind of the nice thing about these try chapters. It does kind of help you see what you have, get excited about some of them, and maybe decide that at the time of buying this was my style, but it isn't any longer. The Rumor by Leslie Cara follows Joanna. In the first chapter, we start off with Joanna at the school pickup line, picking up her son Alfie from school, when she hears a bunch of the mothers talking about someone who has moved into the neighborhood. Or the rumor that someone has moved into the neighborhood. No one really knows if it's true. They think it is a grown-up Sally McGowan. Sally McGowan, at the age of 10 years old, committed a murder or a manslaughter. It is kind of unknown exactly what happened. She was sent to prison as a manslaughter and did get out and now is out, but now there's a rumor that she's living in the neighborhood. Joanna is actually a realtor, so she actually knows like who is moving into the neighborhood, what houses have been sold recently, and she starts to look into this a little bit. She starts to Google the case of Sally McGowan, finding out the circumstances of what happened. During a game with her friend Rodney, stabbed him in the heart. Rodney was, I think, 5 or 6 at the time. Sally was 10. Sally did go to prison for manslaughter, has now been out, changed her name, and is apparently living in this community. I was intrigued by this, even though I just said I don't like suburban psychological thrillers, because with like the look back, it kind of gives it almost like a cold case vibe, which I do enjoy. And it seems like even looking at the start of the second chapter, that is what's going to happen, because I noticed that the start of the second chapter has like a newspaper cutout or like a web search ad of a newspaper that was put out about the case. So that does intrigue me a little bit. And I'm kind of interested to see Joanna kind of research this case and see what happens, because I feel like there has to be more to the story than what meets the eye during the first chapter. I did not put a bookmark in this one because I'm not in a super big rush to continue, but I am intrigued and I could see me picking this up fairly soon based off this kind of cold case vibe that I'm getting from this book. Obviously, it's not a cold case because technically it was like solved, but like I still feel like there has to be more to it. So maybe something was never kind of discovered about this case. Like there has to be more going on. There has to be more that meets the eye. So it's still giving me like a cold case feel, even though it's not really a cold case. I hope that makes sense. Well, friends, I've read the first chapter of The Other Passengers, and this is also going to go in my unhaul pile. The writing style of this just does not work for me. Something about it is just not vibing with me, and I really don't enjoy the way the story is already going and some of the conversations that this character is having and some of the thought process of this character. I'm already just like, being in your head for an entire book would be a lot. It would be too much. And there was nothing in that first chapter that gripped me. Actually, the whole time I was like, I don't like this. The writing style is really the issue, but I hate when characters like hit home certain things, like people being millennials or people being Gen X, which is both things really hit home in this first chapter. And it just isn't something that I particularly enjoyed. So I'm just going to unhaul this book. But I will tell you what is happening, just in case maybe you like it too, because I do really think it is a writing style thing. Nothing against the story. So if you like the writing style, you might really like this story. The writing style just instantly did not jive for me. We follow our main character. She is on her commuter ferry. One of her colleagues does not show up, and she's just sitting on the ferry kind of making commentary about the people around her, which I never really love because sometimes that commentary is a little bit off color. And I kind of felt that in this book just a little bit. When the ferry trip is over, there is a police officer waiting for her to take her to the police station based off her colleague not showing up. And now they have come to take her to the police station to ask her some questions. That's all that happens in this first chapter. We meet a couple of other colleagues while we're waiting on the ferry. And that's it. The writing style is just not for me. So unhauling this, unfortunately ending this with an unhaul. But even though we're ending it on an unhaul, I actually feel like this did get me excited to read some thrillers. We have 2 with bookmarks in them, 2 that I'm very excited about continuing, and 2 that went back on my shelves that I will definitely be continuing sometime in the future. Just not necessarily as quickly as I'm going to continue these 2. But I still feel like picking up at least these 2 thrillers really, really soon. They both have me really intrigued after the first couple of chapters, and I definitely want to see what happens with them. And maybe finishing these books will even put me more back into my thriller era and my thriller mojo. Because I do miss reading thrillers. I really do. So I'm excited to dive back in. But I think I need a really specific type of thriller to get my attention right now in the reading era that I'm in. I think I need it to be action-packed. Both of these are pretty action-packed. A plane crash, robots, and one is a sci-fi, so it kind of like is a nice mix of the era I'm currently in while giving me that thriller vibe. So I think to get back into my thriller era, I just need to pick something that's going to really be action-packed or kind of maybe be a genre blend. Maybe I need to read more genre blend thrillers. That's actually something I really haven't done before, is read a lot of genre blend thrillers. I really have stuck to, just your basic thriller. So maybe that's something I need to explore as well in this time of kind of wanting to read thrillers, but not necessarily being drawn to them. So since this whole experiment was me trying to get back into my thriller era, I need to know, do you have reading eras? Do you have moments where you're reading a certain genre for long periods of time? Still mixing in other things every once in a while, like I still mix in romance with my fantasy and sci-fi right now. And last year I mixed in fantasy with my romance. But is there like an overwhelming kind of like genre that you're just in the vibes for right now or at a time? Let me know if you do that too. And also what era you're currently in. Are you in your romance era? Are you in your sci-fi era? Are you in your fantasy era? Are you in your thriller era? Let me know. I'd like to know if I'm not the only one. And also, if you want to force yourself into a different era and you do a try chapter, I'd love to see that too, because this has definitely worked for me, I think. I know we did have a couple of unhauls, but like even that I think is a win because it gets the books on my shelves to be the books that I really, really want to read. Anyway, that's it for me today. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.